knowing the cause that triggered the formation of the solar system and which led to the formation and early evolution of the sun and the planetary system. He has authored and co-authored around 100 research publications in international and national journals and conferences. He also operates an astronomical telescope. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Sandeep to start the talk. Also, all the participants can drop their questions in the chat box and they will be addressed by Professor Sandeep at the end of the talk. Now, over to you, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So I will start my talk. Uh, okay, so I'm going to talk about the origin and evolution of the universe. Okay, when we discuss this type of things, naturally the approach that we are going to follow is this scientific approach. Okay, we are going to tell you the story about the origin and evolution of our universe on the basis of the laws of physics. Okay, so naturally, since science is not, generally we say that science is provisional. Provisional means that we know about the reality of our universe as of now. Okay, so we will try to understand what are the things that we know are definitely true about our universe. There are certain things which are still speculative in nature. So anyway, the future research will unveil all those mysteries in future. There is a basic thing here when we study the origin and evolution of our universe. The important thing is that, uh, first of all, why do we study astrophysics and for that matter, space sciences? The argument is that if you want to understand how everything came into existence in the first place, okay, so this is an approach. Okay, so we want to understand the Big Bang. How did the universe originate? We want to understand how the galaxies were formed. We want to understand how the how the stars are formed, how the stars evolve, how the planets are formed, then how the solar system originate. Okay, there are thousands of questions that can come to your mind. So astrophysics is basically a branch of sciences where we try to address all these issues in a logical manner. Okay, so in this talk, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to talk about the first of all, I will discuss about the universe in totality, how the things look like, and then we will talk about the evolution part. Okay, what I can do is that I can record this lecture. I have a mechanism of recording this lecture. I can share you this lecture. Is it okay? Can I do like that? Can somebody reply me? Hello?
Sir, we're already recording the talk.
Oh, you are already recording. Okay,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Okay, fine. Then there is no problem. Okay, so now let us discuss it. The basic thing that we start with the universe is ourself. Okay, so we have to talk about the life. Okay, now the question is that how do you define life? There has to be a very straightforward and crisp answer for that, and the answer is that anything, you can define anything as a life if it has got a capability of reproduction. So life is basically defined on the basis of reproduction. Where does the life exist? At this moment, the only place where we definitely know that the life exists is the planet Earth. Life can exist elsewhere, but we have no definite proof of the existence of life elsewhere. But then, based on the fact that the life is actually made up of some 5-6 major elements, like we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. Okay, now the thing is that if you have these 6 basic elements and you have the catenation property of carbon, and if you have liquid water existing on a place, there is a possibility that life will form itself. You don't need miracles. Life can form itself. And once the life forms, it starts evolving. Okay, so on our planet Earth, we know that life originated some 4 billion years ago. Now 1 billion is 10 raised to the power 9. In this talk, when I'm referring to 1 million, it means 10 raised to the power 6. 1 billion means 10 raised to the power 9. So we have to be careful about it. So life originated on our planet Earth some 4 billion years ago in some primitive form, some basic amino acids. Okay, amino acids are the building blocks of life. Now, if you have amino acids, you can have proteins. Okay, and you have a basic structure which comes into existence, that is RNA or DNA. And these two things have got the property of producing proteins. Proteins which constitute our body, whether it is our body, whether it is the body of a plant, whether it's the body of an animal or anything. Anyway, so life is not a very great mystery. We know that it exists on our planet Earth. And if you have these 5-6 elements, some chemical reactions will take place. If you have liquid water, and the life will originate. By the way, this is the type of life which exists on our planet Earth. There could be some other form of life we do not know. Okay. Now, so life exists on our planet Earth. Now, what is the important criteria for life? I mentioned that it is liquid water. You need liquid water. Now, it so happens that if you look at the nearby planets like Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth happens to have a lot of liquid water. We have rivers, we have oceans, seas. So most probably life originated in water bodies. Okay, we have some idea about how it originated and how it evolved. If you look at our solar system, we have some interesting places. We have inner planets like Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. We'll discuss these things very soon. And then we have outer planets. And these outer planets are giant planets like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Now, the interesting thing is that some of the satellites of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, they have got a lot of liquid water. In fact, those are water worlds. Now, is it possible that you can have life on those places? So satellites of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, there is a possibility that life could exist there also. Okay, but we do not know as of now. Now our entire solar system, what we consider as a huge solar system, you know that it is quite big, in the sense that light takes approximately 8.5 minutes to reach Earth from Sun. Sun is our nearest star. What about Pluto? It takes something like 5 light hours. 5 light hours, or you can say that it takes 5 hours for the sunlight to reach Pluto. So you can understand that our solar system is really a very big place. Now this entire solar system is nothing but a small dot somewhere here, which I have marked here in our Milky Way galaxy. So this is our Milky Way galaxy. Our Milky Way galaxy is a very huge galaxy. It is a spiral galaxy. It has got spiral arms. You can see it. The simplest way of visualizing our Milky Way galaxy is to consider two dinner plates, put them against each other, or think about a flying disk. Okay, this is the top view of our Milky Way galaxy. This is the edge view. Okay, the bottom one is the edge view. At the center of our galaxy, we think that there is a very massive black hole. It exists. Okay. In fact, the last year Nobel Prize went to one of the scientists who discovered that black hole, massive black hole. Then apart from that, our galaxy has got something like 400 billion stars. Okay, some 400 billion stars. Okay, and sun is just one of the stars. Okay, nothing great about our sun. Okay, this is the edge view. You can see the sun is at one of the edge of our galaxy. Now comes the question, do we have other galaxies in our universe? Yes, we do have. we may have trillions of galaxies in our universe, just like our Milky Way galaxy. There is something referred to as a large scale structure. Okay. Uh, Imagine that if you have this entire Milky Way galaxy, you represent it by a single dot here in this figure. Okay. Now you start counting the total number of dots existing in this figure. You cannot count it. By the way, this is a computer generated image of how our universe will look like. Okay. So we have billions of galaxies distributed in our universe. So this is the totality of our universe. This is how our universe actually look like. Now let us start with our sun, the nearest star. We'll discuss the physics of sun, and then we will move to the other places. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give you an experience of a voyage through our universe. So let us start with our sun. Sun is the nearest star. The surface temperature of sun is approximately 6,000 degree Kelvin. Okay. There are basic tools in physics using spectrometer and things like that. We can calculate the temperature of sun. It's a standard Wien's displacement law which you study in physics. Okay. We use very simple tools of physics to do astronomy actually. It's not a very big deal when you do astronomy. At least principle wise, tools are very simple. Technology may be complicated. Sun is basically made up of hydrogen gas. Okay, but it does not mean that the other elements are not present. So sun is basically a ball of gas. Okay, with the surface temperature of 6,000 degree Kelvin. If you go deep inside the core of the sun, there is something referred to as the core of the sun. There, what happens is that the hydrogen nuclei, it fuses. It undergoes nuclear fusion reaction. So what will happen is that 4 hydrogen nuclei will fuse to produce helium, helium-4. Okay, so you can understand that 4 protons are consumed, 2 protons remain as such in helium nuclei, and 2 of these protons are converted into neutrons. So we get helium-4. It's not a single stage reaction. It's a series of nuclear reactions. Important thing is that this reaction takes place at very high temperature. It is of the order of 15 million degree Kelvin. Okay. So as you go deep inside the sun, the temperature rises. At the core, it becomes 15 million degree Kelvin. Okay, which is a very high temperature. At that high temperature, this thermonuclear fusion reaction starts. Okay. Now, what makes the sun shine? The sun shines because of this particular thermonuclear reaction. Okay. The energy which is generated deep inside the core of the sun. Okay. And then it leaves the surface of the sun. Sun is the main source of energy in our solar system. In fact, when you talk about our Earth, most of the energy that we have on our planet Earth, it is actually derived from sun. Whether it is in the form of direct sunlight which we are receiving, or it is in the form of photosynthesis. Plants, using the photosynthesis, plants produce oxygen and they produce food, our glucose. Okay, we are dependent on that glucose. So it's a very simple chemical reaction which happens in the presence of sunlight, and that is how we get our food. The entire food of our planet, it is derived from that. Okay, now what are the other things which we have in our solar system? We have planets. The central planet is the Mercury, which is the innermost planet. Then we have Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Pluto, earlier they used to call it as a planet. Now they don't call it as a planet. They call it as a dwarf planet. Okay. it does not matter. As far as researchers are concerned, it does not matter whether you consider Pluto as a planet or dwarf planet, because our job is to actually understand the origin and evolution of everything, whatever exists in the universe. So even if tiny thing matters or the big thing matters, everything matters to us. Okay, now there is an interesting thing about our solar system. The innermost planets like Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, these are rocky planets. They are made up of rocks. Okay, so you can go and you can stand on the surface of these rocky planets, right? Of course, Earth has got liquid water, but then if you have land also. Okay, so we are on rocky planet. These planets are referred to as the terrestrial planets. If you look at the outer planets of our solar system, like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, these planets have got gases, okay? And the prominent gas is the hydrogen and helium, of course. It does not mean that they do not have rock. They do have a rock. They do have rocky cores at their center, okay? In fact, Uranus and Neptune has got lot of ice also, okay? On top of their surfaces, means almost the entire planet itself, it's mostly gaseous, okay? Especially the Jupiter and Saturn. These are known as the gaseous planets, okay? The important thing about all these planets is that these outer planets are giants. They are quite big, okay, compared to the innermost planets. The innermost rocky planets are tiny, okay. In fact, they say that if you have one Jupiter, you can put 1,000 Earths, more than 1,000 Earths in Jupiter. Jupiter is so huge, okay. By the way, this figure is not to be scared, okay, because here it looks as if Earth is comparable to Jupiter. No, in fact, if you were to draw Jupiter like this, Earth would be less than this, okay, much less than this. Now comes an interesting question. Why is it that the inner planets are rocky and they are tiny, whereas the outer planets are giants and these are made up of gases, lot of gases? When we study the origin and evolution of our solar system, we try to address all these issues. Further, we try to address this issue, then how come we have liquid water existing on Earth? There is a possibility that some of the comets and asteroids, by the way, I forgot to mention that apart from these planetary bodies, we have asteroids, okay. Asteroids are basically rocky fragments or rocky bodies which are going around the sun between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter, and there are thousands of such asteroids, okay. In fact, when we study the origin of our solar system, all the planets which we have, they were actually formed from the accumulation of asteroids. So there was a time, long time back, some 4.5 billion years back, when our solar system was forming and there were asteroids everywhere. These asteroids are referred to as planetesimals, okay, because these planetesimals will come together and it will result in the formation of planets. Apart from asteroids, we have comets, okay. Now there's a possibility that some of the comets and the asteroids, they brought water to Earth. That is how you explain the presence of so much water on Earth. We'll come to this point as we proceed. So the idea here, which I'm trying to tell you, is that we have diverse range of planets in our solar system, and we have to understand how these planets were formed, how these planets evolved. Okay, now when we talk about the outer planets of our solar system, Jupiter, this is not the actual photograph. There is a software, it's a planetarian software. You can download it, is freely available. It is Celestia, okay. It's a very interesting playful planetarium. You can play around with it. You can in fact show it to your brothers and sisters, everybody will enjoy it. Uh, the outer planets, this Jupiter, this fellow has got more than 70 plus satellites, moons. Okay, just like we have got one moon only, Earth has got only one natural moon. Jupiter has got more than 70 plus. Okay, this is one of the moon by the name Io. This fellow is quite interesting. I'm not going to talk about all the moons, but let me give you an idea about what sort of crazy worlds exist in our solar system. If you ever have a desire to watch volcanoes, okay, this is the satellite. Okay, this satellite has got huge volcanoes. Okay, this is the best place to watch volcanoes. Okay, there are active volcanoes. Okay, you can see, in fact, see in these photographs, these rounded things are basically active volcanoes. Okay, so we have an interesting thing here. Jupiter itself is a very interesting body. I told you that it's basically gas, hydrogen gas. The coloration which you are seeing, it is because of ammonia, then because of some hydrocarbons, okay, mixture of that. These are basically cloud patterns, okay. And there is an interesting thing here. There is a spot here. This is known as the great spot of Jupiter. It is like a cyclone that we have, okay, especially in the southern India. We have cyclones, even in Odisha side region. This is an anticyclone, and this has been active for at least 300 years. Okay, now that is interesting. People have this difficulty in understanding how a anticyclone can be active for such a long time. Okay, apart from that, there are very interesting places here. If you want to see very beautiful images of Jupiter, actual photograph, you should go to a satellite by the name Juno. Okay, it's a NASA satellite. You will see very beautiful photographs of Jupiter, detailed photographs. This is an artistic image. It's not a real image again. You can see here Saturn. Now this fellow has again got more than 70 plus satellites. The interesting thing about these satellites of Jupiter and Saturn is that these satellites are water worlds, in the sense that these satellites have got lot of water. Okay, if you say that their core is made up of rock, okay, then there would be lot of water, and on top you have ice. Okay, these are water worlds. For instance, you can see over here, there is one this is an artistic image. There is a satellite by the name Enceladus. It is orbiting Saturn. You can see the ring of the Saturn. On this Enceladus satellite, we have water eruptions, the geyser eruptions. You can see the water coming out. As the water comes out, it solidifies. Some scientists speculate that at least one of these rings of Saturn, one of the icy rings of the Saturn, is actually getting created by these type of eruptions. These are water eruptions, so you can call it as water volcanoes. Okay, this is again artistic image of Jupiter and a satellite by the name Ganymede. Okay, Ganymede has got very huge canyon system. Okay, then just like there is a Grand Canyon in the United States, so if you go to Ganymede, you will have very big canyons. Okay, so Ganymede is the largest satellite of our solar system. Okay, it is in fact bigger than Mercury. Am I audible? Is it going okay? Can somebody reply?
Yes, sir, it's going perfect.
It's going okay. So it's am I audible? The moment the connection breaks, please ring me. Okay, so don't hesitate about it. Okay, so we have this planetary system. Okay, in fact, you can spend a lot of time. In fact, I specifically do research in these some of these problems. the important thing here, which I would definitely like to communicate, is that, see, in India we have ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization. You people can try there. Okay, they have got several research institutes. Okay, they are already sending spacecrafts to some of these planets, and in future they are going to do more of these things. Okay, so India is now doing a great job as far as the launching satellites are concerned and spacecrafts. Okay, so you can try those things. Okay, now I mentioned you earlier that the outermost object, of course it is not the outermost object. We have objects even beyond that, which are the solar system objects. This is Pluto. Okay, now the Pluto is 5 light hours away from sun. So the light takes 5 hours to reach Pluto. Okay, now there is an interesting thing here that at this moment there are so many spacecrafts which are being flown by different space agencies. Some are going to the inner solar system, some are going to the outer solar system, spacecrafts. Now, how do they communicate, these spacecrafts? They communicate it through radio waves. Now, radio waves travel with the velocity of light. Okay. Now, you can understand that if you send a signal to a spacecraft, which is, let us say, somewhere close to Pluto, the signal is going to take 5 hours. Then this fellow will, the spacecraft will execute that command which you have sent. Okay, so you can understand that when you are operating these spacecrafts, how difficult things are. Okay, because you are working on the technology which is quite complicated, and you can understand the problem with the time. Okay, so you have to actually, what you have to send a signal a priori if you want to do something. Okay, when we do astronomy and astrophysics, we use the unit of light year. Of course, you know this particular thing. 1 light year is approximately 10 to the power 16 meters. Okay. The concept of kilometer or mile is not adequate enough. We have to use light year. Okay. Now, there is a diagram which we use in astrophysics. Some of you might have heard about it, but let me give you an idea about it. This is known as the HR diagram, Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. Now, the idea here is that in our galaxy, using very simple tools in physics, okay, at least principle wise these are simple, okay, like spectrometry, like photomultiplier tubes, like CCDs, charge coupled devices, cameras. We can study the properties of stars just by sitting over here. Okay, so what we notice is that, in fact, you will agree to this thing. If you have gone to some remote area, you go to a remote area, watch the night sky, you will see that some stars are red in color, like for instance Betelgeuse, that is red in color. Some stars are yellow in color, like Polaris. Some stars are blue in color, like Spica. Okay, some stars are again red, some are simply white in color. There is a diagram on which we represent the basic properties of a star, and that basic property is its surface temperature. What is its surface temperature? So if you notice here, this is 3000 degree Kelvin, this is 6000 degree Kelvin, 10,000, 30,000. So on x-axis we have plotted the surface temperature of the star. Where is sun? Sun is here. This is sun. So it is 6000 degree Kelvin. On the y-axis we plot luminosity. Now what is this luminosity? It is basically energy emitted by the star in 1 second. Okay, it is arcs per second. And what we do is that for our simplification, we normalize it with respect to sun. Okay, so where is this solar luminosity on this diagram? It is this. Okay, so you can see sun is here. This is sun. Okay, so sun, it is 6000 degree Kelvin surface temperature. Luminosity normalized is 1 here. The actual luminosity of sun is approximately 10 to the power 33 arcs per second. So the sun basically emits 10 to the power 33 arcs per second energy. Okay, so this y-axis is normalized. Now you can understand that a star like Betelgeuse, okay, where do you see Betelgeuse? I will show you that star very soon. Betelgeuse emit more than 10,000 times more luminosity compared to our sun. Number one. Number two, its surface temperature is approximately 3000 degree Kelvin. Okay, so compared to our sun, it has got low temperature. That is why it appears as red. And compared to our sun, it emits more energy. Okay, this is known as a red giant star. Okay, red giant, because it is red and it is giant. Now, why these stars are red in color and these stars are blue in color? It's a very simple thing. We have the Wien's displacement law. Lambda maximum times T is equal to constant. The constant is 0.29. Okay, so if you increase the temperature of a star, surface temperature, the lambda maximum, the maximum emission, the black body emission emitted by a star, it goes towards lower wavelength. Lower wavelength means high energy. Okay, it's a very simple thing. Let me give you a demonstration of it. In winters, when you use an electric heater, room heater, you turn on the heater, the first thing which you feel is the warmth coming out of it. Okay, slowly this filament of the heater becomes red. Okay, and it stays red. At the most it can become white, but it stays, most of the time heater becomes only red. So where is the IR region? IR region is here. This is the red region. Okay, so initially when the temperature is low, we are IR, then when the temperature becomes high, it becomes red. If you have a special type of heater through which high currents can pass, it will slowly become yellow as the temperature goes up, and it will slowly becomes white then, and then it will slowly become blue. Okay, I'm talking about some hypothetical heater which can acquire very high temperature. In fact, we don't have to talk about hypothetical heater. You think about the flame from your gas. If you notice that the place where the flame is coming out, it is bluish in color. Why? Because that region is very hot. As you go away from the flame, it becomes yellowish or reddish, because the temperature in those regions are lower. Okay, so lower the temperature is, higher is the lower the temperature is, higher is the wavelength, means red color. Higher the temperature is, lower is the wavelength. Okay, lambda maximum times T is constant, Wien's displacement law. Now what we do in astrophysics is that we actually make an HR diagram of a star. Okay, like this, where we basically plot the major properties of a star. In fact, this diagram is very complicated. I can spend hours on discussing it. If you notice here that there is a radius of the star here plotted like loci. There is a lifetime of the star plotted here in different regions. Okay, and in fact there is a mass of the star. This is 60 solar mass, 30 solar mass. This is 1 solar mass, 0.1 solar mass. Okay, so if you represent the mass of our sun as 1 solar mass, which is represented like this, circle with the dot, this represents sun. So this is 1 solar mass, which is here. So this is 0.1 solar mass star. This is 60 solar mass star. So we have wide range of properties of the stars plotted on this diagram. The important thing about this HR diagram is that it is an evolutionary diagram. Evolutionary diagram in the sense that right now you say, okay, the sun is here. If I ask you a question, when the sun was formed, where was it? Okay, on this HR diagram. Now I will give you a basic idea where it was and what will happen to our sun. So I will represent the evolution, the formation of the sun on this diagram. So the sun started forming somewhere here on this diagram. On this diagram, it evolved in this direction, then it went up, then it came down here, and now it is settled over here. Okay, this is how our sun was formed. I will discuss the processes how the star is formed. What will happen when the sun dies? Some of you might have heard about it, that the sun is going to become a red giant star. So what will happen is that after the sun has lived its life, it will go up, then it will go here, then it will go somewhere here. It will become a red giant star. Okay, and then it will throw out its matter into the interstellar space, majority of the matter. A small core inside the sun will be exposed, and that core will become white dwarf. Okay, so that is how you will get a white dwarf. In nutshell, the moral of the story is that this HR diagram is an evolutionary diagram. So you are at any given moment looking at the star's stellar property, what it is right now. If you want to see how it formed, how it is going to evolve, so it is altogether a different story. You will see that thing. Okay, so this is HR diagram, and we have a now great understanding about how the stars are formed, how the stars live, and how the stars die. Okay, now let us come to this Milky Way galaxy. Can you see the Milky Way galaxy in your place? For instance, Hyderabad. Chances are that you will not be able to see unless there is a total power failure in the entire city. This is how the Milky Way look like. It's like a band of light crossing our sky. Okay, these are basically made up of stars. Okay, in Indian system we used to call it as Akash Ganga. Okay, it's actually made up of 400 billion stars. This is the actual photograph of Milky Way galaxy taken with very powerful telescope. The bright things which you are seeing, these are basically all those 400 billion stars existing in our galaxy. What are these dark regions? These dark regions are basically interstellar dust. We have interstellar dust present everywhere in our universe, in galaxies. Okay, light is not able to pass through this dust properly. Okay, so that is the reason why you see gap in light. These are gaps in light. Okay, in fact, I will be showing you some photograph where these gaps will become more predominant. By the way, if you want to know about a software where you can see the star maps, the Milky Way itself, there is a software by the name Stellarium. Okay, please download this software. It is freely available. There is one thing which you have to do. Once you download this software, in the menu, you go to location, change the location. The default location for this software is Paris. Okay, so you have to make it to Hyderabad or your place where you are spending your lockdown period. Okay, so change the location, change the latitude, longitude. This software will show you the actual sky map. It will show you the actual map, a star map which exists in your place at a particular time. And it is really remarkable, this software. You can play around with this. Okay, so the earlier software which I recommended was Celestia, which is a planetarium. This is Stellarium. Okay, so you play around with this software, lots of things. I've mentioned this thing earlier that Milky Way galaxy is a spiral galaxy. Okay, if you see the structure of it, there are spiral arms. Okay, where the concentration of stars and the interstellar gas and dust is more. Then there are regions where there are gaps. Gaps, not exactly gaps, but the density is a little bit low. If you view our Milky Way galaxy from the top side, this is the view. It is the face-on view. This is the side view. You look at this side view. Okay. This is what we, at the center, we have what we call as the galactic center. Let me change the color. We have the galactic center here. Okay. And I have mentioned you that at the galactic center, there is a massive black hole. Its mass is million times the mass of sun. Okay. Somewhere some 30,000 light years from the center of the galaxy, we have our solar system. It's somewhere here. Solar system is not a great thing here. Of course, when we talk about our solar system, we say that it is so huge. I mean, sir, you are sending a spacecraft to Pluto. It takes long time. Okay. Even sending a spacecraft to Mars takes a lot of time. But then the entire solar system would be just a dot here on this figure. After all, there are 400 billion stars like our sun in this Milky Way galaxy. Okay, so you can understand it's really, really big place. This is 30,000 light years. Okay, distance between the sun and the galactic center. How do you remember this number? Means how can you connect it with something? It's just a coincidence. Please don't carry it to that level. See, the dogs became our friend some 30,000 years back. Okay, it's just a coincidence. Something like 30,000 or 25,000 years back. Okay, so they were evolving and they became our friend. They came and we started at. They became our pets. Okay, now the light which we receive from our galactic center. This is the photo of our galactic center in infrared, using the infrared telescope. So this light which we are receiving just now, it started its journey when from the galactic center, when the dogs became our friend. Okay, so you can understand that from that moment onward, the whole light has been traveling and we received it just now. This is an interesting thing. When you look at the universe, there is no mechanism by which you can look at the present day universe. It is ruled out. Okay. The reason being that light takes time to travel. When you look at the sun, what it is 8.5 minutes back, was back. Okay. There is no mechanism by which you can say I'm looking at the present sun. When you look at a nearby star that is several light years away, so you look at what it was few years back. Now here we are looking at something 30,000 light years back. Okay. Moral of the story is that the furthest object is there in our universe, the further we are going back in time as far as that object is concerned. Okay, now comes a very interesting question. If you are looking at can we look at the Big Bang itself? Big Bang occurred 13.7 billion years back. Billion means 10 to the power 9. Can we go to that? Can we look so far away where we can see the Big Bang? The answer is that at least with the present day technology, we cannot do it. But we can go very close to that point of Big Bang. That is what we will discuss very soon. Okay. So this is just one Milky Way galaxy. There are billions of galaxies in our universe. There is no count actually. In fact, we have not seen our entire universe so far. Why? Because the universe was created 13.7 billion years back. It started expanding like hell in the beginning. Okay. And because of that, light from several places, faraway places, has still not reached us. Okay. We have wide range of galaxies. This is a spiral galaxy. There is a spiral galaxy with a bar at a center. There is an ellipsoidal galaxy. there is a irregular galaxy. I've just taken some few examples. Here you see two galaxies colliding with each other. Okay, so we have collisions of galaxies going on in our universe. In fact, what happens is that when two galaxies collide, a bigger galaxy is formed. Okay, by that argument, this particular galaxy is referred to as a Magellanic Cloud. It is coming towards our Andromeda as our galaxy, and it is going to become a part of our galaxy. Our galaxy Milky Way is going to collide with Andromeda galaxy in future. Andromeda galaxy is really, really big compared to our galaxy. So in future, our galaxy will become a part of Andromeda galaxy. So the galaxy basically evolves. Okay. Of course, I will not say that these are living creatures, but because of way we have defined life, it means it can reproduce. Galaxies cannot reproduce themselves. But then the galaxies have evolution. They evolve. They become bigger. This is the large scale structure. It's a computer generated image. First of all, there are people even in India who do this type of work, theoretical research. Every dot here, bright dot here, represent one galaxy. Now you start counting the galaxy. What you notice here is that our galaxy universe is as such, it appears to be homogeneous because we have matter everywhere in our universe. But then there are voids. You can see the voids. Okay. There are gaps where the density of the matter goes down, where you don't see lots of galaxies. Okay. There is a filamentary structure. You can see the filamentary structure here like this. Okay. This actually looks like cotton candy. Okay. You might have enjoyed cotton candy in your childhood. So this is like cotton candy, pink color. Okay. Now, of course, this one is not pink color. Okay. It has got all the colors of electromagnetic spectrum. Why our universe is like this on large scale? The argument here goes like this, that as our universe was created and had started evolving, there were certain matter fluctuations. Okay. Matter fluctuations which came into existence right in the beginning. And those fluctuations over the time got amplified because of the expansion of the universe. Okay, so that is why certain places you see more matter and certain places there are voids. Okay, now how does the entire story begin? As far as our Milky Way galaxy and as far as our universe is concerned, the credit for this goes to Hubble. Okay, Hubble was an astronomer and he observed several galaxies. He did the spectroscopy of galaxies and he noticed one very interesting thing. And that interesting thing is that majority of the galaxies are running away from us. Okay, the galaxies exhibit Doppler redshift. Okay, so what it means is that as the time progresses, the galaxies which are right in our vicinity, they are going to move away, majority of them. Scientists speculated that if this is the case, that then you run the time in the reverse direction, what do you see? The galaxies will come toward the same point. Okay, this gave rise to the concept of Big Bang. Okay, so what is Big Bang? Big Bang is the creation of the universe starting from a single point. And what is that single point? Dimensions are mind-boggling. It is extremely, extremely small, the dimensions, the physical dimensions. Okay, so our universe started from a single point. Okay, long time back. What is the exact number now? Exact number is 13.7 billion years. As our technology improves, this number is becoming more and more precise. 13.7 billion years. Now, people can still debate about this issue whether Big Bang occurred or something else happened, but then most probably it was something like a Big Bang type of an event which occurred 13.7 billion years back. This is the creation of our universe. Okay, so our universe is expanding. Okay, now, so it occurred 13.7 billion years back. Now I give you a basic overview about how the universe evolved in step-by-step manner. When we talk about the Big Bang, was it an explosion? No, it was not an explosion. It was actually the creation of space, time, matter, energy, everything that you can think about. Okay, of course, the universe started taking its present day shape over the next 13.7 billion years up to the present time. But Big Bang is the beginning of space, time. Okay, when we go to the right at the beginning of the Big Bang, we go to an era which is known as the Planck's era. Okay, Planck's epoch or the Planck's era, where we talk about very tiny dimensions. Okay, dimensions of the order of 10 raised to the power minus 44 seconds. Okay, means if I ask you a question, how far can you go in splitting up a second? You will say millisecond, microsecond, nanosecond, picosecond, keep on doing it. The physics does not allow you to split the time beyond 10 to the power minus 44 seconds. This is referred to as Planck's time. In a similar manner, the physics does not allow you to dissect space to anything less than 10 to the power minus 35 meters. Okay, if I ask you start dividing meter into centimeter, micrometer, nanometer, how far you can go? 10 to the power minus 35 meter. The quantum mechanics does not allow you to go beyond that. So our universe started with this dimension in space and this dimension in time. Okay, with lot of energy. Okay, this is what you refer to as the point of singularity in Big Bang language. Okay, so what is the point of singularity? It is the tiniest dimension in space and time that you can think about. Okay, once this Big Bang initiated, the space-time started creating itself. Okay, so what you can call as the expansion of the universe is actually coming from the Big Bang. Okay, see, normally when we say that the time is flowing, okay, we started this lecture some time back, now the time is flowing. So you can say that our creation of the time started from the Big Bang, and after that it has been flowing and it continues to flow. In a similar manner, the universe is creating its space and it is expanding. It is creating space between this space, and that is how the expansion is explained. It started with a very small dimension, it started creating its space, wherefrom it got all the energy. That energy was available initially in the form of Big Bang. Okay, how did this start? What was the motivation? There was no motivation. In our entire universe, technically there is no motivation for anything. Our universe in any scale is mindless. It does not have a mind. There is no motivation. There is no argument for anything. It simply follows the laws of physics. That's it. It simply follows the laws of entropy, minimization of energy, all those things. It's as simple as that. No emotional content associated with anything as related with universe. Okay, so it started expanding initially with very high energy. Initially the temperatures were very high. Okay, more than 10 to the power 15 degree Kelvin. Okay, then as the universe started expanding, because it is creating more space, the same energy was distributed over larger volume, so the temperature started falling down. It's a simple, what we call as an adiabatic expansion. Now, sometimes people ask this question, in which entity the universe is expanding. There is nothing there in which it is expanding. It is creating its own space. This is an interesting thing. Our universe is like a picnic. You go to a picnic. First of all, you create that space. Okay, you create the grass, you create the mat yourself, you create your food, you create yourself also, and then you have the picnic. It's like that. So your universe created its own space. It is not expanding in anything. So as the temperature started dropping, now there are a sequence of eras which it has gone through. The earliest era is what we call as a quark gluon plasma, where the quarks were not confined within the baryons. The quarks were free and they were interacting through the gluons. Okay, it's a very high energy era. As the temperature dropped to 10 to power 12 degree Kelvin, this is a very simplified picture which I am giving you. The details are there. We generally do that, those things. We understand those things, but I'm giving you a very simplified picture. When the temperature of our universe was 10 to power 12 degree Kelvin, we are talking about 1 microsecond old. When our universe was only 1 microsecond old, our universe went through an era known as a hadron era. All the protons of our universe and the neutrons, they came into their existence at that time. I'll not say all the neutrons because after that things are going to change. But you can, broadly speaking, you can say that we started seeing the glimpse of protons and neutrons. Okay. Initially, all the energy was in the form of high energy photons with the universe. These photons are capable of producing quark anti-quark pair, lepton anti-lepton pair. Okay, so that is how we got all the quarks and the leptons. And from these quarks, the protons and the neutrons were formed right in the beginning, in the hadron era. As the universe expanded further, in 4 seconds, the temperature dropped to 10 to power 10 degree Kelvin. Electrons freezed out during this era. So you can say that whatever electrons exist in our universe, they came into their proper existence as of now during that era. The other thing what happened was that in this lepton era, the neutron to the proton ratio, it dropped from 1 initial value to 0.23. This is going to decide what sort of universe we are going to live in. Okay. What is the, how did this whole thing happen actually, Big Bang? It's a mystery even now, but we think that it was some sort of a quantum fluctuation. Okay. The quantum mechanics is a bizarre subject in the sense that you talk about certain probabilities which are very low, but nonetheless they can occur. So the creation of the universe is a low probability event which occurred. So the universe got its own energy, it started expanding. It's like a bubble. This is how Stephen Hawking would visualize this particular thing. Okay. Now people ask this question, is this the only universe? The answer is no. You can have other universe getting created, maybe existing right from earlier times. Okay. So this is the whole thing. So it's not actually uni, it's multiverse. Okay. You cannot have this thing alone. It's an egocentric theory when you say that this is the only universe. You are only satisfying your ego, as if the whole thing was basically created for you. No, it was not created. It's a mindless universe. It didn't have any mind when the whole thing started. Even now, it does not have any mind. As the universe evolved, its temperature kept on dropping. After 100 seconds, the protons and the neutrons started forming the first nuclei, like the helium nuclei, okay, like deuteron, okay. as the temperature dropped further to 10 to the power 4 degree Kelvin, something interesting happened. And that interesting thing is the production of neutral hydrogen atom. So this is neutral. So you can see a proton and an electron. This is a very stupid picture with electron orbiting proton. There is nothing like that. But then to show it schematically, this picture works. What was there before that? Before that, the protons and the electrons were separate. Okay, you can say that the hydrogen atoms were ionized before that because the temperatures were very, very high. Okay, now when this transformation took place, when the neutral hydrogen atom formed, these electrons became bound for the first time. Okay, as they became bound, if there were any photons in the earlier phase, these photons used to get scattered from these free electrons through Compton scattering. But the moment this electron became bound, there was no longer Compton scattering. So if there are photons in that environment, they will go just like that. They will start traveling longer distances. Earlier, the moment a photon tries to go somewhere, this electron will scatter it. As a result of this transition, this recombination, here electron is recombining with the proton to form a neutral hydrogen atom, our universe became transparent for the first time, starting from an opaque universe. So before this, starting from the beginning to up to this era, which lasted for 10 to the power 12 seconds, this is roughly 10 to the power 5 years. 0.1 million years, you can say. During this period, our universe was opaque. The moment this recombination took place, the universe became transparent. And after that, it has been transparent. That is the reason why night sky is dark and you can see stars which are millions and millions of kilometers away. Okay, because universe is transparent. Before that, it was not. This transition, you can say this as a phase transition of our universe. When this phase transition occurred, in the present day universe, we see a radiation coming from this era. That radiation is referred to as the cosmic microwave background radiation. Some of you might have heard about it. It's in the microwave region, radio waves. Okay. If you have a radio telescope, you can watch this radio waves coming from everywhere in your universe. You turn your telescope in any direction, radio telescope in any direction, you will see these radio waves coming. The very fact that you are getting cosmic microwave background radiation, it justifies that our universe has gone through this transition, and most probably everything before that means it has started from a Big Bang. So I was mentioning that, can you see a signature of Big Bang if you look very far away? Yes, if you look very far away, you get this cosmic microwave background radiation, and this is a proxy record of Big Bang. It is telling you that Big Bang occurred, it happened. Now, are there any other signatures coming from hadron era, lepton era, or quark gluon plasma? There are, but so far those have not been discovered. In future, there is a possibility that using very powerful neutrino detectors, those signatures will be discovered. But you have to wait for a very long time. So you need neutrino detectors and some other technologies to actually venture into those eras. Okay, so this is the basic overview of the whole temperature evolution of the universe. So on x-axis we have the time. This is the present day universe. This is the hadron era. You see that the temperature is dropping, and we have the rest of the things. This is the recombination era, when the universe became transparent. It was opaque here before that era. Okay, now once you get the neutral hydrogen atoms, everywhere in the universe, the first thing what happened was that these neutral hydrogen atoms, they started accumulating in certain places, okay, and it resulted in the formation of neutral hydrogen atom gas clouds. Okay, so these are gas clouds, neutral hydrogen atom gas clouds. So everywhere in our universe, these neutral hydrogen atom gas clouds were formed. Now, when we study the evolution of Big Bang, at certain places there were density fluctuations. Density means fluctuation means that there the densities were high, the matter densities were high. So those places where the matter densities were high, the gravity was stronger there. So the gravity at that location started bringing these intergalactic neutral hydrogen gas clouds together. This resulted in the formation of proto-galaxies. Proto-galaxies means the galaxies which are undergoing formation. As these proto-galaxies became bigger, they further collided with each other, either through dynamic, kinetical or dynamical processes, or just by the gravity. They started forming the galaxies. Okay, so that is how the galaxies were formed, starting from the neutral hydrogen gas clouds. So this is the formation scheme of the galaxy. I told you earlier that this process is not over even now, the evolution of galaxies, because the galaxies keep on colliding with each other, and as a result of which bigger galaxies are formed. Okay, now let us discuss about the formation of stars inside the galaxies. Stars are born, stars live for some time, then they die. Okay, and the interesting thing is that all the elements which we have in the periodic table, starting from carbon to uranium, all these elements are actually produced inside stars by thousands of nuclear reactions. Okay, stars are nuclear factories. Stars produce elements. When they die, they throw their material into interstellar space. From that material, new generation of stars are born, and the cycle goes on. Here I am showing you a particular constellation by the name Orion. If you go to that software which I have mentioned you, Stellarium, you can see this constellation. You can in fact magnify things there. That is an interesting thing. You can select a particular thing there and you can magnify it. Orion constellation has some very interesting stars. This is Betelgeuse, the red giant star I mentioned you earlier. This is Regal. Okay, this is another very big star. This is the belt of Orion. This is nothing. In some talks, generally when I am giving it to kids, I give them an impression that imagine that you are going in a spacecraft. If you are interested in Star Trek movies, this is one of the spacecraft flown by the Star Trek crew. Okay, forget about this image because it's basically meant for kids. You are a little bit more grown up. Okay, so there is an interesting feature here. Let me use another pen. This feature. If you use a powerful telescope, this is what you see. This is referred to as a molecular cloud. Okay, it has got hydrogen molecule as the predominant molecule. Then you have wide range of molecules here. You can go up to polyaromatic hydrocarbons. You can in fact have hydrocarbons which are the building blocks of life. All these molecules exist in this region, and you can understand it's a quite big region. It could be several light years big. These molecular clouds are the places where the star formation takes place. Okay, take this central image. Let us magnify it further. I've taken these images from the Hubble Space Telescope images or some other images. Okay, I have a telescope, but we cannot take so fantastic photographs because of the telescope is not that great. These are very big telescopes. So magnify the central thing, you see this. It's a beautiful Orion molecular cloud. Magnify the central region further, you see this. Magnify further, you see this. Okay, I think it can be magnified further. Now I am digitally magnifying it. Now what you notice here is that there are 4 stars here. This is what we call as the trapezium system. It forms a trapezium. Okay. In fact, when you look at this Orion molecular cloud through a binoculars, you will see those 4 stars, these 4 stars. You will see it as if there is a cloud there. This has nothing to do with our atmospheric cloud. Okay, it's altogether a different thing. These places are star forming region. A part of this molecular cloud can undergo gravitational collapse. Okay, means the gravity just squeezes it and a star is formed. See, after all, a star is also a ball of gas, hydrogen gas basically, to start with. Okay, a part of this molecular cloud collapses because of its own gravity or because of some external perturbation. A star is formed. Here, in fact, you can see certain tadpole-like objects. I'm not sure whether you are getting it, but there are certain tadpole-like objects. So we have an active star formation region here. These places are capable of producing thousands of stars together. Okay. In fact, there is one Chandra X-ray observatory. Okay. It's an X-ray telescope. If you see the image of this region in X-rays, you will see thousands of stars there in this region. Okay. Which we cannot see because of the presence of cloud. It's a interstellar cloud. Okay. There is another star forming region here in this. Okay, let me erase it. Let me show that region first. If you go to this particular place, okay, in the belt of Orion, this is what you are going to see. Okay, this red photograph. Okay, this is another molecular cloud. In fact, it's a part of this big Orion giant molecular cloud structure. So what you notice here is this thing. This is Horse Head Nebula. Okay, if you magnify it, it looks like a horse head, but there is no horse head. Actually, you have all the stars undergoing formation here. There is a patch of interstellar dust which is blocking the sunlight. So it gives you an impression as if there is a horse there standing there, but there is no horse there. It's just in our mind. Moral of the story is that these molecular clouds are the places where the star formation takes place. Okay, gravity squeezes a region of this molecular cloud and a star is formed. Okay, so that is how the star formation takes place. This is another interesting star forming region. See, it is not that the Orion molecular cloud is the only molecular cloud existing in our universe. There are billions of such places scattered in our universe. This is referred to as Carina Nebula. Okay, this is again very interesting star forming region. It's a huge. You see these stars. All these stars were formed here because of that processes which I mentioned. There are other stars here. There are so many stars which are undergoing formation. If you focus these regions here, there is a lot of dust here. These dusty regions, they are referred to as the dusty molecular cloud cores. They are the most likely places where the star formation is going to happen very soon, because here the density of molecular cloud core is very high. Okay, so in future, if we meet after few million years, there's a possibility that instead of these dark dusty clouds, we will have stars, cluster of stars, just like what we have here. Okay, so there are huge interesting places here. Now if you are wondering about where from you get this red color, the red color is the first transition in the Balmer series of hydrogen atom. Hydrogen atom, when n is equal to 3 to n equal to 2 transition takes place, a photon is emitting with a wavelength of 6500 angstrom. That is red color. That is how you get the red color. Where from you get the greenish color? It comes from a transition in oxygen atom, O plus oxygen atom. Okay. Where from you get the bluishness in this photograph? That is Rayleigh scattering. Okay. 1 by lambda 4 Rayleigh scattering. You might have heard about that thing. Okay. So everything is explained on this diagram. So this is just a bunch of examples which I've taken: a particular molecular cloud, another molecular cloud, and there are a wide range of molecular clouds. Some of the places these are referred to as nebula. Nebula basically means a patch of gas. Okay, this is, for instance, Trifid Nebula. It's the name of this nebula. Okay, again, let me remind, this redness is because of the first Balmer series transition, that is referred to as H alpha, spectroscopic notation. The darkness is dusty gases. Okay, the presence of dust which is obscuring the light. Again, the same thing you see here. You can find out the most likely places where the star formation will occur in these regions. Okay, so this is the basic physics. A part of the molecular cloud collapses because of the gravity. A star is formed. When do you say that the star has formed? When at the core of the star, the hydrogen burns to produce helium and the energy is released. This is the thermonuclear fusion reaction. And this thing happens at a temperature, especially in our sun. It happens at 15 million degree Kelvin. Okay. So at the core of the star, this particular nuclear reaction takes place, thermonuclear fusion reaction. Now comes a question: what happens to the stellar evolution? What is stellar evolution? I mentioned that inside a star, at the core, the hydrogen gets slowly converted into helium. Now comes the question: what happens to the star afterwards when the entire hydrogen inside the core is exhausted? So we will have a helium core. Okay. Now there are details here which I cannot discuss in this lecture because it will take a long time. Depending upon the mass of the star starts evolving in a different manner. But what can happen is that now these 3 helium nuclei at the core can undergo thermonuclear fusion reaction to produce carbon. That is how C12 is produced in nature. If you ever wondered where from we got carbon 12, so this is how it is produced. So earlier inside the core, hydrogen was getting converted into helium, a thermonuclear fusion reaction. Now helium is converted to carbon. Carbon will be converted by another nuclear reaction to oxygen 16. So that is how oxygen 16 is produced. So the processes continue. There are thousands of nuclear reactions which operate inside the stars, and all the elements are produced, starting from carbon to uranium. Everything that you can think about, everything is produced by wide range of nuclear fusion reactions or neutron induced reactions. Interesting thing is that when we discuss nuclear physics, you know that there is a curve known as the binding energy curve per nucleon. Okay, so on this axis you have A, on this axis you have binding energy per nucleon. So you know that it goes up, then it saturates, and then it falls like this. There is a small fall. At iron it maximizes. So up to iron, everything is produced by thermonuclear fusion reaction. Most of it, not exactly everything, but majority of the elements are produced by thermonuclear fusion reaction because the binding energy per nucleon is increasing. Beyond iron, everything is produced by neutron induced reaction. So the neutrons produce everything beyond iron. Okay, so there is a crazy thing that can you produce gold in lab? Okay, the straight answer would be no. But then you can do it actually. If you have a neutron reactor, you start with a lower element like iron. Okay, keep on putting neutrons and neutrons and neutrons. Some beta decays will take place, which will convert some of these neutrons into protons. Eventually, you will get gold or uranium, whatever you want. Generally, we do not do it in our labs, okay, because it is very cost effective. But then the stars do it for us, okay. If you think that they are doing it for us, but then I told you that it's a mindless universe. Once the star produces all these elements, the star, if it is massive, it explodes. This is an actual explosion photograph. This is referred to as a supernova explosion. Okay. Sometimes a very small core is left at the center. This core can become neutron star or black hole depending upon what is its mass. Okay. Main idea here is that the matter which is ejected out is now rich in these heavier elements. So remember that when our universe started, it started with only hydrogen. Helium was produced to an extent, but rest of all the elements are produced inside stars. So stars are formed from molecular clouds, cores. Okay, we have discussed it. The stars evolve depending upon their masses, they evolve differently. And then they eject their matter either in the form of supernova explosion or some other mechanisms into the interstellar space. From this material, next generation of stars are again born. Again, the whole cycle goes. Again, this keeps on happening. Hello, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir. You're
Huh.
audible, but you are a little over time because we have to address the questions also from the attendees.
Okay, I will finish it very quickly now.
Okay, thank you,
So
sir.
this is the entire evolution of the star. It's of the universe. It started from the Big Bang. The galaxies were formed. Inside the galaxies, star formation takes place. Stars evolve. Then they throw their material into the interstellar space, and this entire thing goes on. Now, some 4.5 billion years back, our solar system was formed. Okay, so universe originated 13.7 billion years. 4.5 billion years back, our solar system was formed. I will just go through this quickly. We think that there was a molecular cloud existing some 4.5 billion years back, the place where we have solar system. A small region of this molecular cloud core underwent gravitational collapse. So this is the magnified view of that. This cloud was initially rotating. The matter went towards the center. At the center where maximum mass went, our sun was formed. So this is our sun. A disk of gas and dust was produced around it. Initially, gas was very hot. As it cooled down, it resulted in the formation of dust grains everywhere in the solar system. These dust grains accumulated to form planetesimals, which I told you earlier that these are the building blocks. These planetesimals collided further to form the planets. Okay, so that is how the planets were formed. Let me, okay. So, okay. Okay, so this is how our solar system was formed. If you ever wonder why all the planets go around the sun in the same direction, the reason is that when our solar system formed and a disk was produced. Okay, so this disk was planar, and the entire thing was having a angular momentum. It was rotating about an axis. So that is the reason why all the planets go around the sun in the same direction. This is an artistic view about the formation of our solar system. So you can see that the sun is forming at the center, and here the planets are forming. Okay. So that is how the planets were formed. This is another artistic view. You can see the formation of our sun here, and the planets are formed here. There was a question I raised in the beginning. Why is it that the inner planets are rocky and the outer planets contain a lot of gases? Okay, like this. These are inner planets. We argue that inside the inner solar system up to Mars, only the rocks could condense. Okay, so that is why we have the rocky planets existing here. Whereas in the outer solar system beyond Jupiter, Saturn, not only the rocks, but even the ice could condense. Okay, so in the outer solar system there was much more material available, and that too lot of ice was available. So the outer planets are bigger because there was lot of material which could accrete into planets there. And once these materials, these rocky and icy bodies were accreted, the gases accumulated around them. So that is how we got the giant planets in the outer solar system. So this is how we generally understand how Earth got its water. We think that some of these bodies, they drifted to the inner solar system and they brought the water. So that is how we got water on Earth. Okay, this I will not discuss. We understand how the planets evolved after their formation. For instance, Earth has got an iron core. We understand how the iron core was formed and how the Earth started evolving. We understand how the Earth atmosphere evolved and how life originates on Earth. Okay, but this is almost the last one. How was the moon formed? We think that when our Earth was forming in the early solar system, and another planet came, it hit the Earth. These are numerical simulations. This by Cameron, a famous astrophysicist in our field. Because of this impact, the debris were thrown out in the space. These debris accumulated to form our moon. So the moon was formed out of Earth. Now, we have got 8 planets in our solar system. The question is that, is it possible that the other stars have also got their planetary system? The answer is yes. Somewhere in 1995, these two guys, they discovered the existence of planets associated with other stars. Till now, more than 4,000, this is now an old one, more than 4,000 planets have been discovered, which these are associated with other stars. So it means that the planet formation is not a unique process. The idea is that if star formation takes place from the gravitational collapse of a molecular cloud, there is a possibility that the planets will also form along with the stars. Okay, so that's it. So I will stop here. Okay, so now I will address the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. That was a really interesting and enthralling talk about the universe. Now there are a couple of questions that came up in the chat box, and I invite my fellow JC coordinator Manaswita to take over the Q&A session.
Yeah, can you do one thing? Can you read the questions?
Yes, sir. We'll be reading out the question. We have our first question by Gautam. Could you elaborate more on how spectrometers are used to measure the temperature of celestial bodies?
Okay, what we do is that the simplest spectrometer that we can think about is the prism. Okay, you pass the sunlight through a prism, you get the spectrum. Okay, the waveguide. I have slides, but I'm not going to spend time on that now. Okay, so you get the spectrum. Now you convert that spectrum into intensity versus wavelength. Okay, what most probably what you will get is something like this. Let me show you that thing. Let me do it here. Okay, hold on, just wait. Okay, so let me do it here. So if you take a simple prism or you take a diffraction grating, you will get a waveguide. Okay, so you convert that waveguide into a black body radiation curve. So you get a black body radiation curve like this. Okay, so this would be waveguide. Okay, how do you do it? Either you put a photomultiplier tube at or you use a CCD, charge coupled device. So you have wavelength here increasing in this direction, intensity here. Okay, now this is lambda maximum. Okay, the wavelength corresponding to maximum emission in the black body radiation curve. So you simply use T lambda maximum is equal to 0.29. Okay, so you get temperature. That is how we estimate the surface temperature. Okay, so it's basically you determine the black body radiation curve using some device, either a photomultiplier tube or a CCD, charge coupled device. We do these things with our telescope. Okay, and then you find out the temperature. So that is how we estimate the temperature. Next question.
Okay, sir. Now our next question is by Bela Kakkad, and it says, "What keeps the sun spinning?"
Okay, I mentioned you that the molecular cloud core from which our sun was formed, it was rotating. Okay, now why would something rotate? Because it's after all gas. Okay, the molecular clouds are basically made up of gases, and in gases you will have turbulent currents, you will have collisions of different fronts, so you will have things rotating at local level. So there is a basic rule in physics that angular momentum is a conserved quantity. So if you start the formation of our solar system from a rotating molecular cloud, the angular momentum has to be conserved. So this is the reason why our present sun is rotating about its own axis, and all the planets are going around the sun in the same direction as the spin of the sun. Okay, so this explains. So it's a conservation of angular momentum. Next one.
I hope that answers the question. Scientists believe there was a chemical evolution with simple inorganic molecules reacting to form complex organic molecules, most likely in the oceans. But what kickstarted this process in the first place?
Okay, see, I was mentioning that we have molecular clouds in interstellar space. Now, some of these molecular clouds have got very complex molecules like polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Okay, in fact, some of the asteroids, there is a possibility of having amino acids. Okay, now these amino acids are basically amine group organic molecules. Okay, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. See, when you talk about any life form has got a structure. Like for instance, we have bones, we have muscles, we have everything. Even a simple single cellular species will have this structure, the basic structure, what you call as a single cell. So there are proteins. These proteins can be derived from amino acids. Okay. So at some point of the time, some 4 billion years, when the earth was cooling down, inside water bodies, these reactions initiated the formation of amino acids. Okay, once you have amino acids, the chemical reactions proceeded in such a manner that the RNA and the DNA complex at some point of the time started. Okay, and in fact a single cell species evolved. Now if you ask a question, how do you get a single cell in these water bodies? The simplest argument could be that imagine that because of the catenation property of carbon, complex chains are formed. If these complex chains, let us say that they engulf a water drop, or what you say that there is a water drop, that water drop gets surrounded by some complex organic molecules like this. So it is as good as a single cell. Okay, so if you are wondering how we got the single cell, so the single cell most probably has started from this type of a thing. Think about froth. In Hindi we say it jhag. Okay, so that could be the beginning. where some sort of chainy structure engulf a droplet of water. So you have an inside environment, you have an outside environment. So the inside environment start taking the shape of a cell. So this is single cell. So eventually these single cells started evolving. Then they acquired the nucleus, they acquired the mitochondria. So that is evolution. Okay. See, the thing is that when these reactions takes place, there is a plenty of time. I told you that our universe does not have any mind. It keeps on trying everything. It's a mindless thing. It keeps on trying everything. So you have all sorts of chemical reactions going on inside this environment, which I've told you, it's like a droplet of water engulfed by a chainy structure, organic stuff. So over billions of years, the life evolved. It acquired cell. At some point of the time, it evolved into multicellular species. Then the multicellular species started evolving. Finally, we have human here. Is this the end? No, it's not the end, because evolution never stops. Nature just keeps on trying everything, depending upon the entropy of the system. So one thing is the entropy and the chemical reactions. Inside stars, it is the entropy and the nuclear reactions. When you talk about life, it is the entropy and the chemical reactions. So it's as simple as that. No complex. Okay. People generally, people of your age, they keep on manipulating, thinking that, oh, how great this is, how it's as simple as that. Simple chemical reactions. Okay. Any next question?
The next question is, time is always defined to flow unidirectionally. Is it because the entropy of universe is always increasing, or is there any other reason?
Actually, it's the other way around. The time has got a single flow. It's in the one direction. The entropy of the universe follows the rule of time. Okay. So the entropy of the system, not only universe, the entropy of any system over the time is supposed to increase. Okay. Because of its randomness. Just like I said here, let me take you a few examples. First of all, let me elaborate on the time issue. Time, what is time? Time, according to theory of relativity, is the fourth dimension of what we call as the space-time continuum. Okay. Time defines the dynamics. Okay. It defines the flow of time. There is only one dimension, flow of time in only one direction. There is a cause and effect principle. Let us not go into that. Entropy of the system, whether it's at a micro level or a macro level, is defined by the time flow. Okay. For instance, imagine a scenario: you are standing 4 billion years back, you are standing near a pond, and some chemical reactions are taking there. Now, the entropy of those chemical reactions will try to maximize it. And the maximization would be the possibility of origin of some organic molecule which can replicate, which can form chains. Okay. So that is there in the chemical domain. Now, what about stars? When these nuclear reactions takes place, it's again the entropy which is deriving those nuclear reactions. So as the time moves, the entropy of the universe tries to increase. This put together defines the dynamics. Our universe, whether it's a micro scale or a macro scale, it is never stagnant. It is dynamical in nature. So time defines the entropy evolution, and that defines how everything evolves. Next one. How gluons create mass?
How glucons create mass? Do they acquire mass?
How
Gluons,
gluons create mass? Okay.
do they acquire mass dynamically despite having zero rest mass?
Oh, there is an interesting thing here. Let me do this thing here. Okay, how the gluons acquire mass? Now, first of all, if you ask a basic question, what is the mass of a proton? Okay, the mass of a proton, one proton, is 1 giga electron volts per c square. Okay, you know this number, 938 or whatever it is, MeV. Proton is made up of 2 U quarks and 1 D quark. Okay, so it is made up of 2 U quark and 1 D quark. Do you know what is the mass of a U quark and D quark? If you simply add the masses of 2 U quark and D quark, it would be something less than 10 MeV by C square. Okay, now that this is the interesting thing. Proton has got a mass of 1 giga electron volt by C square, whereas its constituents 2U plus 1D put together is only 10 MeV by C square. Where from the mass comes? Almost the entire mass of the proton comes because of the gluonic interaction between this UU and D quark. Okay, so the gluons, even though they are massless, the U and D, even they don't have mass, because of this strong gluonic interaction, this entire energy comes into picture, what you call as the energy or mass. Okay, so it is the exchange of these gluons that defines the total mass of total energy or total mass, whatever you say. In fact, in theory of relativity, we do not distinguish between energy and mass. So it comes from the gluonic interaction. Now, how does this gluonic interaction takes place? If that is a question, I can address it separately, but that will take time. But let me give you a very simple idea to avoid time loss. What happens is that if this is U quark, now just like we have positive and negative charges in electrodynamics, there are 3 charges, what we call as the 3 chromodynamical charges, which exist in this strong interaction. So we generally refer to it RBG. Okay, these we call them as the colors. Okay, so there is a complex color mechanism by which these gluons interact. Okay, so that is how the whole system gets this energy. Okay, it's like this. It's not a very great analogy, but it's this is how it works. What defines a family? The parents and the kids defines the family. Okay, what is the interaction between the family? That is the major thing which decides the family structure. Okay, after all, otherwise there are just what is it after all? A family, father, mother, and let us say 1 kid. The total weight is something like 200 grams. Okay, but is it 200 grams? No, there is a family there. It's the interaction between the family, the binding between the family, human binding. In this case, the 2U, 1D with the strong gluonic interaction defines that thing. Okay. Next one.
Mr. Ramchandar Naik asks, why our universe has predominantly more matter than antimatter?
Okay, see, I mentioned that in the early universe, there were only photons, high energy photons. These photons will produce quark, antiquark, lepton, antilepton. So in the beginning, there were equal amount of quarks, antiquarks, leptons, antileptons. But then at some point of the time, there was a symmetry breakdown. Okay, this is known as a symmetry breakdown. Now, how this symmetry breakdown took place, that is an involved story, but you can say something like this, that right in the beginning, when the equal number of protons and antiprotons were created, equal number of electrons and anti-electrons positrons were created, some of those antiprotons decayed. Okay, this is known as the symmetry breakdown. The protons didn't decay, but the antiprotons decay. When these antiprotons decayed, they actually killed positrons along with them. So our universe became proton and electron dominated universe. Okay, so you can say very simple, in a very simplified manner, you can say that if you have equal number of protons, antiprotons, if let us say that the proton decays quite rapidly compared to if the antiprotons decay quite rapidly, naturally you will have a matter dominated universe. So that is what exactly happened. Okay, next one. What are the
What?
evidences of yeah,
Alan
okay.
Goode's inflation of early universe.
Okay, there are three arguments. I'll not go into the technical details of all those three arguments. See, our universe is a very big universe. It's so huge. You have seen the large scale structure of the universe. It started from something like 10 to power minus 35 meters. Now, in the conventional sense, when you discuss the Big Bang origin, it is very difficult to produce so big universe starting from so tiny universe. So you need some sort of a inflationary theory. Inflationary theory says that right in the beginning of the universe, somewhere during even before the quark gluon plasma era, our universe expanded in an exponential manner. Okay, it resulted like hell. Okay, that is the reason why our present day universe is so big. Now, then comes three arguments. One is related with the possibility of magnetic monopause. The other is related with the possibility that why is it that our universe is so big and it is so uniform. Okay, so why the left hand side of the universe, if you put it in a very simplified manner, is exactly the same as the right hand side. So the argument would be that at some point of the time our universe was so tiny that everywhere there was the equilibrium could achieve. Then it expanded in an exponential manner, and that initial equilibrium got imprinted in the present day universe from that initial. For that, again, you need this inflationary epoch. Okay, so there are arguments why this thing is rare, but the most important is that you cannot explain so big universe starting from a very tiny if you don't have inflation. Anything else?
If any of the participants have questions, I request them to unmute themselves and ask the question.
Does length is quantized?
What?
Length, Planck length is quantized, like fundamentally the space
Okay,
time is
see,
quantized.
what we do is that when we talk about very tiny dimensions in space and time, we have to club two different theories. One is the general theory of relativity, and the other is quantum mechanics. In general theory of relativity, there is a concept of what we call as the Schwarzschild radius. Okay, and in quantum mechanics, we have the Compton wavelength. So when we discuss about the Big Bang origin, what we have to do is that we have to equate the two things. Equate the Compton wavelength of the universe with the Schwarzschild radius of the universe. So that is the place from where we get the Planck's epoch. So at that level, the universe is discretized. It is quantized. The space and the time is quantized. As far as my understanding is concerned, people are still struggling to actually develop this theory because there is no concrete theory which exists for that. Just like there is a quantum electrodynamics theory, which is a quantum version of classical electrodynamics. As such, you have strong interaction theory, weak interaction theory. But for gravity, that thing does not exist. So people are still working on those things. If you can get hold of somebody from IUCAA, Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, who works on quantum gravity, so that fellow can be able to tell you more about that. In fact, you can try that, and they will be very helpful to you. Just like you organized my seminar, you can try there also. Okay. So punchline is, right now we do not have a theory for quantization of space-time, but then this is the path how we approach. Compare the Schwarzschild radius with the Compton wavelength. So you enter into the domain of quantum gravity. Okay. Any other query?
Does our universe really homogeneous and isotropic everywhere, or is just an assumption?
Okay, see, as such, it appears to be homogeneous and isotropic. But when you start looking at the structures of cosmic microwave background radiation and the large scale structures, so you have voids, you have inhomogeneities, okay? All those inhomogeneities, voids, they make sense, and anisotropies, okay? In fact, if I would advise you, and this is next advice, you can ask somebody from background of cosmic microwave background radiation to give you a talk, okay? Because these people, what they do is that they study the anisotropy and inhomogeneities in the cosmic microwave background radiation. Based on that, they can tell you a lot about the early universe, okay? So there are definitely anisotropies and inhomogeneities. So people do study those things. Next question, any other query? Is there any other query? Hello? Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Ah,
yes, sir.
okay.
I think no further questions. With that,
Okay,
I would like to conclude.
okay,
On behalf
thanks.
of Junior Science Club, I would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to our honorable speaker, Professor Sandeep Sahajpal, who shared his virtual presence and took out valuable time from his busy schedule to share his plethora of knowledge with us. I also wish to express my gratitude to the Director of College of Integrated Studies, Professor Sanjay Subodh, and to the Associate Director, Professor Krishnaveni Misra, for providing us with the opportunity and support to organize this webinar series during this ongoing pandemic. I'm very grateful to all the faculty coordinators of JSC, Professor S. Ilangovan, Professor Sarmishta Banerjee, Professor Srinath, and Professor Mullidharan for their constant presence, guidance, and valuable encouragement. At last, I extend my big thanks to our CIS office members, all the senior and fellow student coordinators of GSC, and our dear audience for participating with such enthusiasm and patience. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I will leave. Okay, bye. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.